the history of the iconic roar of Godzilla. What's up, folks? Welcome back to Factholic. Today we're back with another hot topic surrounding the king of the monsters, Godzilla. I know the long wait for the next Monsterverse release is probably taking a toll on all of you Goji fans out there, but let's try to be patient here. After all, good things come to those who wait, and it's just a matter of a few months only. So, in the meantime, we decided to bring you something from the vault of the Big G's history. Yeah, we're going to cover the iconic Godzilla roar today and try to give you more insight on how it all began, and also the history behind the famous roar. So, let's get right into it. Now, there's no doubt about it, Godzilla's roar has long been considered one of cinema's most iconic and recognizable sounds. Often copied or otherwise widely acclaimed, the original and rather unique roar first terrified audience goers in the 1950s. Since then, it's been built upon to dramatic effect in the numerous sequels and remakes. But one question still makes many fans wonder till date. How did they actually make the original sound? And where did the idea for Godzilla come from in the first place? Well, the general response with regards to the Big G's origins definitely lies with the two infamous atomic bombings of Japan in World War II. And it's no secret, but we're not talking about that here. We're talking about a certain individual from the film industry who's credited to come up with the idea behind the monster. Yes, we're talking about producer Tomoyuki Tanaka. Now, we won't go into much detail there because we're focusing particularly on Godzilla's roar. But if you want us to cover that as well in the future, do let us know in the comment section below. We'd love to make a video on that as well, to be honest. Now, the idea was there and even Godzilla was created, but after creating the monster, another important task was left. Godzilla needed a voice. We already know that the Big G was designed to be an unnatural combination of various creatures, both alive and dead. So the sound crew found it especially difficult to come up with something that worked for its roar. After all, this creature was going to start an era of legendary monsters that would later come to be known as kaiju. So its sound had to be iconic as well. Although if you told them that Godzilla would go on to become such a huge deal, they probably wouldn't have believed it. The sound effects team tried to use animal sounds to create the roar, but only to fail unsuccessfully. So how did they manage to create that iconic roar? Well, they turned to one special individual for this special task. And who was that person? Meet Akira Ifukube, a famed composer of that time who not only created the iconic Godzilla roar, but also the sound of its footsteps, and composed the film soundtrack as well. Over the past 60 years, each incarnation of the film since has taken a slightly different recipe for cooking up the sound, but the base has remained the same for every incarnation, the Monsterverse included. So, how was this iconic sound created? Well, let's get to know it from the man who created the sound himself. So, according to Akira, sound engineers went to a local zoo and recorded the roars and cries of virtually every animal there just to try to come up with something usable. After that, they tried a number of combinations of each of these sounds to create something distinct, only to fail each time because the resulting roar always sounded too familiar. Ifukube even mentioned that at some point the engineers eventually got so desperate they even tried distorting the cries of random animals like herons to the point that they were unrecognizable, but nothing was satisfactory. But seriously, herons? That would have been a complete disaster. But lucky for us, Ifukube knew where the problem was. So the issue, at least in Ifukube's eyes, was that the roars of other animals, even when heavily distorted, still sounded too natural. And that was a no-go for the roar in any manner, since what they really wanted was a unique sound like nothing ever heard from an animal before, but still animal-like and a little terrifying. So what they did next was they scrapped all the previous sounds, and despite working under an incredibly tight deadline, Ifukube decided to look at other potential means to make the roar. And guess what? He actually found the perfect solution. And let's hear it from his own words about how he created that iconic roar. Ifukube states, "For the roar of Godzilla, I took out the lowest string of a contrabass and then ran a glove that had resin in it across the string. The different kinds of roars were created by playing the recording of the sound that I'd made at different speeds. Now, the resin on the glove helped create the added friction needed while being dragged across the string to make a noticeably grating sound that would hopefully cause a feeling of unease in those who heard it. If you didn't get it, then imagine the sound produced when running nails on a chalkboard, but with a lot more depth. Yeah, that's the kind of uneasiness we're talking about. After Ifukube suitably abusing the contrabass, sound technician Ichiro Minawa took the recordings and processed them at various speeds. Garnished with a few additional zoo animal noises and echo effects, Godzilla issued its first chest-rattling roar not long afterwards. Now, a monster that size needed an equally thunderous approach, and Ifukube suggested using a new magic box he recently discovered at Toho, describing a kind of proto-amplifier designed by sound productionist Kitaro Tonegawa. Much like electric guitar's distortion's American origin myth, Ifukube accidentally knocked over the amplifier one day, causing it to issue a cavernous blast of sound. Again, those recordings were tinkered with and layered to give Godzilla its massive footfalls, adding another potential father figure into heavy metal's creation myth. So that was how the iconic Godzilla roar was crafted out of scratch. And the credits for creating that masterpiece go to Akira Ifukube. Now, that was the roar story. But let's take a background look at the legendary composer too, since without him we probably would have never heard that roar. So Akira Ifukube, born on May 31st, 1914, is widely considered as one of the most well-regarded and prolific composers of modern Japanese classical music and film scores. His revolutionary blend of traditional ayano, Japanese folk melodies, and instrumentation with Western classical theory paved the way for cultural merging and experimentation in the years to come, sort of like a Japanese Philip Glass. Although given their respective eras, it's more accurate to call Glass an American Ifukube. Coming back to his contributions in the original Godzilla movie, after its release, audiences and critics on both sides of the Pacific were stunned by the film and its aesthetic ingenuities. This was largely made possible by Ifukube's genius, and perhaps it marked the beginning of a long, fruitful relationship between Ifukube and Toho Studios, with the musician further contributing music for the Godzilla series all the way until 1995's Godzilla vs. Destroya, appropriately touted as Toho's official conclusion to the kaiju franchise at the time, until its inevitable stateside and Japanese reboots a few years later, of course. It goes without saying, Ifukube's contrabass technique clearly changed the sonic landscape for kaiju as much as it did the classical world. Following Ifukube's footsteps, Toho Studios would later go on to bring out a variety of musical instruments to help create additional roars for new movie beasts, or kaiju, like another augmented contrabass for the Flying Rodan, a saxophone for Armored Anguirus, an appropriately trippy electric organ for King Ghidorah, the lightning-spitting space dragon, a symphony of monsters with Ifukube as its orchestral director. So that was all about the history of the iconic Godzilla roar. We hope that you enjoyed watching the video as much as we enjoyed making it. Also, do hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, so that you won't miss any new content we upload. And until next time, keep watching Factholic.